Hello there. Welcome to whatever we're calling this show. Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to SiDEQUEST. This is our fifth time attempting this due to technical issues, not pointing any fingers. It's all mine. It's all my fault.
No. We just want everybody here.
But yeah, no, once again, we're doing something a little different in that we're watching this little compilation of interviews with George Lucas over the years in regards to his early life and going into film school and beginning filmmaking and his philosophy on such things. But without further ado, let's begin. So for our audience who's just listening, not watching, it's saying when George Lucas was 18, he nearly lost his life in an automobile accident. And
sometimes the thing that the auto accident, I was a terrible student in high school, and the thing that the auto accident did, and it happened just as I graduated, so I was at this sort of crossroads, but it made me apply myself more because I realized more than anything else what a thin thread we hang on in life. And I really wanted to make something out of my life. And I was in an accident that, in theory, no one could survive. So it was like, well, I'm here, and every day now is an extra day. I've been given an extra day. So I got to make the most of it. And then the next day is I've been given 2 extra days. And I've sort of, you can't help in that situation but get into a mindset like that, which is you've been given this gift, and every single day is a gift. And I wanted to make the most of it. Before, when I was in high school, I just sort of wandered around, and I wanted to be a car mechanic, and I wanted to race cars, and I just, the idea of trying to make something out of my life, wasn't really a priority. But what the accident was allowed me to apply myself at school. I got great grades. Eventually, I got very excited about anthropology and about the social sciences and psychology, and I was able to push my photography even further, and eventually discovered film, and in film schools, and you actually go to school to learn how to make movies, and it was like, suddenly everything came together in one place.
I find that fascinating, how it's, in my experience at least, in a lot of cases when people suffer through a traumatic event like that, often if it doesn't, I suppose there's the phrase, if what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but, not always. Sometimes it'll cripple you, but I do find this, it's a common theme, I suppose, in that, like, people will, when faced with their own mortality, you often find purpose. Not to say go risk your life jumping off a bridge or something, but just, I do find that quite interesting.
I know after the second time that I overdosed, when I woke up in the emergency room, I was hit with the profound thought that either I should get better at this, or I really need to get my act together, because life's a tough road and it's not for the weak. So I went back to school with a new almost vengeance that I was going to graduate and I was going to do well, and I was going to go to graduate school and graduate well and get my MBA. And I was going to get serious about my relationships, and I was going to get married. I was 26, so I found a new perspective on life.
That's really fascinating, and thank you for sharing. That is, yeah, I'm not sure what words to use. That's really, yeah, wow. Thank you for, yeah, just thank you for sharing. Like, again, as someone, I guess, still in what George was saying, like his wanderer stage or whatever. I hope it doesn't take, having to go through something like that, but I'd like to find a calling like that. But enough about me. Let's listen to what more he has to say.
All my likes, everything I actually seemed to have talent for, was right there. And I said, hey, this is it. I can do this really well. I really love to do it. And from then on, I just, took off. But before that, I was kind of wandering, as I think a lot of students do. I decided to go to film school because I loved the idea of making films. I love photography. And everybody said it was a crazy thing to do because in those days, nobody made it into the film business. I mean, just unless you were related to somebody, there was no way in. So everything, that's silly. You're never going to get a job. But I wasn't moved by that. I set the goal of getting through film school, and just then focused on getting to that level. Because I didn't know where I was going to go after that. I wanted to make documentary films, and eventually I got into the goal of, once I got to school, of making a film. One of the most telling things about film schools, you got a lot of students in those days, especially, it's not quite so much today, but wandering around saying, oh, I wish I could make a movie. I wish I could make a movie. I can't get in this class. I can't get any, first class I had was an animation class. It wasn't a production class. I had a history class and an animation class. And in the animation class, they gave us 1 minute of film to put onto the animation camera, to operate it, to see how you could move left, move right, make it go up and down. And it was a test to see, and then the teacher you had certain requirements that you had to do. You had to make it go up and make it go down. And then the teacher would look at it and say, oh, yes, you maneuvered this machine to do these things. And
I find that inserting my own stuff again. As someone who took many animation classes in college, I find that interesting. How it's not to criticize. I find it interesting. Yeah, that I guess what they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So with that limit that was placed upon him, I suppose that fostered, a sort of realizing what's necessary in film, no need for extravagance. Whereas nowadays we're literally just limited by a hard drive, which can fit literally billions upon billions of times more than any strip of film could. So I wonder, I think there are pros and cons to this. Whenever there's innovation, like or just in general, the same way artists might challenge themselves in making a painting with only a specific color palette, not the infinite variety you can, at least that our trichromat eyes can tell. I suppose that's a whole other philosophical ramble, I suppose.
Wait, were you saying wait, what? You lost me. Saying that art is to limit himself and what he uses because he wants to stay true to whatever his vision is. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that I find it interesting how back in those days, in which animation was a very, very different field, there was no such thing as digital animation, which is now the vast majority of what's done, which I can attest to, having an animation degree. That spiraled more into just the thought about, art, about limited. How there are benefits to being unlimited and to being limited. As the same way I meant, a painting with a limited color selection, or a, because that in and of itself does spark its own form of creativity. Again, necessity is the mother of invention.
Well, he's going to get into a ton of that throughout this interview, and how all that affects one another, and especially his own decisions and what he's done throughout his career. So you're on. Yes.
Okay. Well then, let's continue.
Took that 1 minute of film and made it into a movie. And it was a movie that won 20, 25 awards, in every film festival in the world, and kind of changed the whole animation department. And meanwhile, all the other guys were going around saying, "Oh, I wish I could make a movie. I wish I was in a production class." And so then I got into another class, and it wasn't really a production class, but I managed to get some film, and I made a movie. And I made lots of movies while I was in school, while everybody else was running around saying, "Oh, I wish I could make a movie. I wish they'd give me some film."
This is awesome.
So this is the aforementioned.
Yes, this is his little. Question. What?
Okay, that was fascinating. At first glance, someone might say, "Oh, it's just a random, assimilation of just stringing together images." But I think, as with any art, it'll be I think that's just a microcosm of the time he was living in. This would have been he was born in 1944, assuming he was 22 or something. This would have been mid-60s. I think that's a very good summation of, the world in the 60s. There was that frame just talking about love. It's there was the whole hippie culture. There was the whole, and then there was the stuff with Martin Luther King Jr. There was the stuff with, and just showcasing, there was that one frame of, I think a Hadzabe lady somewhere in Africa. Anyway, who I believe at the time were, and just, whatever that guy was saying, suffer not the oppressor or whatever. I think that, while he was living it, it became a timeless, what of everything we associate of the 60s. I guess he was aware enough to tell what were we going to remember in the, decades to come of that time period. I'm not sure I could summarize the 2020s while I'm still in the middle of it. I mean, aside from saying lol, COVID lockdown, but
hey, well, those are some of the big themes right there. It's going to be that AI. I don't really know other good themes that you can think of. I don't know.
Well,
I don't
we're
really
only
know.
3 years in anyway, but
remake. Isn't that funny? Our generation's going to be known for remakes. It's anyway.
I mean,
okay.
in many ways, the 2020s are the 1920s and the 1980s 2.0 Electric Boogaloo. Just the same, similar, economic recession, but also the same exact franchise that were around in the 80s. Anyway,
And migration, and I mean race has become an issue again, and then just it goes down. We could probably make a pretty decent video that showcases the events of our time. And remember, that's only while he's in college. So that's just what is affecting him at that moment. But you're right. I think that he nails it with a clear, like you can see everything. It's a clear view of the world that he was living in and his interests and what was inspiring him at that moment.
Right.
Heart baby.
As a time traveler from that period, you have to understand that the 60s were a really unusual time in that the 60s that everybody thinks of were only the last 2 years of the 60s, maybe 67 too, but you know, hippies and the Haight-Ashbury district and free love and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That didn't appear till the end of the latter part of the 60s. Most of the 60s was still very much like the 50s, and it was a series of traumas that shook the nation. It wasn't just one event. It was first the murder of John F. Kennedy,
Right.
obviously by covert forces from which we've never yet heard the truth. Then it was the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King, also by covert forces from which yet we've never heard the truth. And then the culminating factor was the murder of Robert F. Kennedy by Sirhan. And then, see, this stuff it's like indelible. It's like it's been tattooed into you. And then, of course, the end of the...
So these major figures, just you're saying that all this was in response to the cultural zeitgeist after their murders?
Well, imagine, if you will, that you want to change a nation's viewpoint. You couldn't do it by one single event. But I'm not saying somebody did this, but just if you were changing a nation's viewpoint, you would need to have a series of events so shocking, so overwhelming, so disparaging that people would lose all hope. That's what these three events did together. Is that people, each one was a deeper blow of the same blow. So,
well, and look what's going on now. As a Zoomer here, none of us feel any hopes for the future. Wonder what's going to come of that.
That's what's scary to those of us who, have seen this or lived through this in the past, is that we're seeing the exact same thing now. So
I find that fascinating. Well, that's why I like to. It's good that we have all these varied perspectives, varied ages. That's, those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. But anyway, getting back to this. To our listening, not watching viewers, the screen says, in 1973, George Lucas had completed production of American Graffiti, but the major studios showed little interest in his next project, Star Wars.
I'd had a very, very difficult time in my first two pictures. And when I started working on Star Wars, my second film, American Graffiti, had not come out yet. And so in the beginning, it wasn't something anybody was interested in. And I'd taken it to a couple of studios, and they had turned it down. And then one studio executive saw American Graffiti and loved it. And I took him the proposal he said, I don't understand this, but I think you're a great filmmaker, and I'm going to invest in you. I'm not going to invest in this project. And
boom, pause it right there.
All of
That's for the audience right there. Go until you find that. Go until you find that. If you can find that, that's a place to work.
Yeah, you just need that, a little bit of someone having confidence in you.
All of my films have been very hard to understand at the script stage, because they're very different. At the time I did them, they were not conventional, and as a result, it's a very hard sell to get them off the ground with a studio. The executives could only think in terms of what they've seen. It's hard for them to think in terms of what has never been done before. That's made it considerably more difficult for me to go against the conventional wisdom, to go do something a little bit different. It's funny when you look back now, because everybody's sort of copied those films, so now they are so ingrained in the culture that it's really almost impossible to think that there was a point where those things were completely odd and unique. The funny thing is, the two movies I did that were my conventional movies, at least that I've directed, were slight twists on very, very, very conventional movies. One was, teenage hot rod movies, which were made by American International Pictures, which were sort of the lowest rung of the movie ladder. And then the other one was Republic serials, Saturday morning serials from the 30s, which were, sort of an ancient lowest rung on the ladder. And so I was taking, in terms of genre, I was taking the lowest genre that was available, and then I was twisting it and making it into something completely different, and something that was, more mainstream in terms of the quality and acceptability of the modern movie-going audience. And I think the prejudice against those films was really that they were cheap B movies, not that they were so out there. Those were movies that I loved when I was younger, and when I came from a very avant-garde documentary kind of filmmaking world. I like cinema verite documentaries, and I like non-story, non-character tone poems that were being done in San Francisco at that time, and that's the filmmaking that I was interested in. Francis Coppola, who was my mentor, he's a writer and works with actors, stage director, and I said, you got to learn how to do this. And
I find it very interesting how you said that, like, it was more the nonfiction, non-character stuff that was his forte, when now he's formulated some of the most iconic characters in history. Like, I imagine this may have been before, he got all into Joseph Campbell and, like, trying to tie into the whole monomyth stuff, tie into those archetypes. That's one of the things, right? Like, people keep forgetting is, like, we change over time. I wonder if you would. But sometimes our perceptions of ourselves don't. So I wonder what he thinks of
him now. Probably around the same. Because that's what he says in that interview with Charlie Rose back when he sold Disney in around 2016, 2015. He says that that's the stuff that he wants to go on to do. But of course, we know he loves his own creation so much that he can't stay away from it. And so he's involved with The Mandalorian and all these shows. And, well, at least with Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, he's involved.
Right.
But no. I don't know. I think he talks about it in this interview. He learns his lesson as he goes. He learns how to cope in the industry that he works in. And it's not all about being the super driven artist that has your own vision and everything like that. It's about, what am I going to be able to sell? And then if you believe enough in that, and there's a need for that, and you can see yourself doing that kind of stuff, and it fits a certain criteria. But notice he's got all these criteria that get met. He's got a studio executive that believes in him. He's got, a drive and a passion and ideas, and he's got talent, and all these things have to be met for you. But a lot of that is you just go out and you work hard enough and you get to that point. And that's the basis behind all of his story, is that he's worked hard. He almost dies, has no real, clear direction with his life, almost dies. And then he has this clairvoyance of, I'm going to make something of my life. And then he just works his butt off until it all happens. And that's what we've got to do. You just got to keep working. Anyway.
Very profound. All right, continuing on.
So I took him up on the challenge, wrote my own screenplays, learned to write, and work with actors. And American Graffiti was really my first attempt at doing something mainstream, so to speak. And even it was so... One, it was in a genre that was looked down upon, but I loved when I was a kid. It was about my life as I grew up, so I cared about it a lot. And then on top of it, it was in a style that was different from what everybody was used to. It was intercutting 4 stories that didn't relate to each other, which nobody really done before. Now it's sort of the standard fare for television. And it had music all the way through it. Not just score, but actual songs from the period, and that is something that nobody done before. And they just sort of described it as a musical montage with no characters and no story. And so it's very, very hard to get that off the ground. And on top of that, it was a B movie. I almost got it set up at American International Pictures, where they liked doing those kinds of movies, but it was too strange for them in terms of the style. And Star Wars was kind of the same situation, where it was a genre they weren't that interested in. Science fiction was not something that did well at the box office. It dealt with robots and Wookiees and things that generally most people, they couldn't read it and say, I understand what this is all about. They just were completely confused by it. And really on top of that, it was aimed at being a film for young people. And most of the studios said, look, that's Disney does that. The rest of us can't do that. So we don't want to get in that area. So I had so many strikes against me when I did that. I was lucky that I found a studio executive that just believed in me as a filmmaker and just disregarded the material itself.
For those who aren't, who are just listening, it's just saying on confronting your doubts and the fear of failure.
Whenever you're making a movie, especially when you're writing, you always have self-doubts. I mean, I came back from the first location in Tunisia shooting. I had to get out of there in 10 days regardless. I didn't get everything shot. What I had shot, it was the very beginning of the movie, what I had shot was dubious in terms of my sense about the creative quality of it. And I was very worried about it. I just didn't know. And then I was working with an editor I hadn't worked with before. I started out as an editor, and I was working with a British editor, and the scenes would come back, and I'd go on the weekends and look at the scenes with the editor, and they weren't working. And I was very down about the whole situation. So I went in myself on Sundays and started recutting the movie. The editing wasn't obviously bad, but it just wasn't working, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. I mean, it was either I was doing a terrible job directing this thing or something else. And as I started to cut the film together, I realized that I was making cuts that were, a foot away from where the editor had been making them. And I'd been using the same pick takes that I'd given him, but I was just slightly moving it ever so slightly in one direction, and it suddenly clicked in and started working, which was a great relief to me, because for up to that point I was feeling very desperate about the whole situation. I think the only way you can deal with feelings of desperation, and I've had this quite a bit in my career actually, uh, you simply have to put one foot in front of the other and keep going. You put blinders on and just plow right ahead. You can't be affected by any of that. When I was doing American Graffiti, I was still struggling with my I don't want to be a writer syndrome. And I had some good friends of mine that I wanted to write the screenplay, but it took me like 2 years just to get the money to do a screenplay, and I got a little tiny amount of money, and which I had to go to the Cannes Film Festival to get on my own. And so finally I got this money. I called back and I said, I got the money, we can start working on the screenplay. And they said, oh, we don't want to do that now. We got our own low-budget picture off the ground, and we can't write it. I said, oh, no. And I said, what am I going to do? I'm in Europe, and I'm not going to be back for like 3 months, and I want to get this thing off the ground. So they recommended another student from school that I knew pretty well. And I had a story treatment that laid out the entire story scene by scene. And so I called him up on the phone from London, and I said, do you want to do this? And he said, okay. And the person I was working with at that time as a producer made a deal with him for the whole money, because there wasn't very much. It was so tiny that he could only get him to do it for the whole amount of money. When I came back from England, the screenplay was a completely different screenplay from the story treatment. It was more like Hot Rods to Hell. It was very fantasy-like, with playing chicken and things that kids didn't really do. And I wanted something that was more like the way I grew up. So I took that and I said, okay, now here I am. I've got a deal to turn in a screenplay. I got a screenplay that is just not the kind of screenplay I want at all. And I have no money. And I spent the very last money I had saved up to go to Europe to make the deal. So I had nothing. And that was a very dark period for me. So I sat down myself and wrote the screenplay. And the most difficult part is during the writing of the screenplay, I kept getting phone calls from producers saying, I hear you're great. I'd made a film called THX, which had no story and no character, really. It was kind of an avant-garde film. And so I had all these producers calling me saying, I hear you're really good at material that doesn't have story. I've got a record album I want you to make into a movie. Or things like that. And they were offering me a lot of money. But they were terrible projects. And so I had to constantly turn down vast sums of money while I was starving, writing a screenplay for free that I didn't like to write because I hated writing. But I did finish it, and I did write the screenplay, and eventually I got a deal to make the movie. And then after I finally got that, then my friends came back in and did a rewrite on it. But it was a very dark period, and I could have very easily just taken the money and gone off and done one of these really terrible movies. I don't know what that would have done for my career, but there's, when the times are hard like that, you simply have to say, this is what I want to do. I want to make my movie. I don't want to take the money. And you just walk forward step by step and get through it somehow. And I got through, actually only took me about 3 weeks to write that script. And I just, every day would sit down at 8 o'clock in the morning and I'd write until about 8 o'clock at night. And I just said, I'm going to finish this, as painful as it is. And I'm going to ignore these phone calls of lure of riches and get through this. And somehow I did it.
So as someone who struggles with motivation a lot, look at my YouTube channel's upload schedule is glacial, is an insult to icebergs. Knowing that this, debatably easily among the most successful filmmakers of all time struggled with, had no money, like, what did he say, 2 years of just nothing. That is, it's almost a little reassuring to, know that, you're not the only one who struggles with these things.
I'm glad you said that that's how I feel. It is. That's why I listen to it, for encouragement. If I don't have anything else to listen to during my day, this is my go-to video.
And Okay, so this new segment here, to our non-watching audience, were there experiences that inspired you growing up?
There wasn't much as a kid that inspired me in what I did as an adult, other than I was always extremely curious about why people did the things they do, and I was always very interested in what motivates people and telling stories and building things. I've always been very, very into building things, whether they're chess sets or houses or cars or whatever. I like to put things together. And when I was young, from at least my teenage years, they were completely devoted to cars, and that was the most important thing in my life, from about ages of 14 to 20. I liked art, and when I first got to college, I was very interested in the social sciences and anthropology, sociology, psychology, those kinds of things. And I was still interested in art and doing photography, and I wanted to go to transfer to an art school, and ended up going to the University of Southern California. They had a cinematography school. I said, "Oh, that's sort of like photography. Maybe that'll be interesting." And once I started in that department, just found what it was that I loved and was good at, and I realized I could do it very well, and that I enjoyed doing it, and really ignited a passion in me, and it took off from there. After that, I didn't do anything but film. So I really didn't have a strong fix. I knew I was interested in anthropological issues, social science, why people do what they do and that sort of thing, and I knew I was interested in photography and art. I didn't know that I could actually put them all together in one occupation and love it. When I look back on it now, if I'd have gone to art school or if I'd have gone on to another university that I was planning to go to,
this is important.
Studied anthropology, I probably would have all ended up back in film. No matter which route I would have taken, I'm almost positive I would have ended up eventually in film. Mostly I just followed my inner feelings and passions and said, I like this and I like this, and I just kept going to where it got warmer and warmer until it finally got hot, and then that's where I was. Film being exciting is something that's just a personal thing for me. I mean, whether it's that way for everybody, it's extremely hard work, and it's not very glamorous, and it ultimately is simply a way of expressing ideas. I am more of a visual person than a verbal person. I like images, and I happen to have a real talent about putting images and sounds and music and telling stories through that medium. And partially for me, I think the excitement is the fact that I found a way of telling the stories I want to tell in a medium that I could master. I think if I'd have gone to try to do any other thing, it would have been much more difficult for me, because I don't think I write screenplays. I don't think I'm a very good writer.
Well, there it is. He still says, I still don't think I'm a very good writer. And yet, and this is still when he's already been, there's something to be said for that level of humility, like, I know some people would argue that's, lack of confidence or whatever, but I don't know. I feel that's more legit humility right there.
He is. He knows that people are listening to what he's saying, and he's trying to show that he's humble, that he thinks about that in his mind. He's totally genuine about that. I believe it.
I think so too.
As I'm very interested in studying cultures and social issues, but as an academic, I don't think I would have been too successful.
But yes, so this will be our first part of a, I suppose, 4 or 5 part series, maybe. Listening through all this, and it's already been 40 minutes, so dear viewer, thank you for listening to our little rambles. That you care enough to listen to our nonsense is touching to our hearts. So, thank you for listening, and may the Force be with you always.